Okay, hi everyone. We're going to get started. Thank you all for being here. This is the Induction Cooking Green at Home workshop from Acterra. My name is Leo Steinmetz. I'm the Beneficial Electrification Manager at Acterra. I work on all of our home electrification outreach programs. And I'm really excited to welcome you here. So just a couple of logistical notes. We are recording this event. You're welcome to keep your cameras on or off sort of as you please. And we'll send out the recording once we have it uploaded to YouTube afterwards. So if you need to hop off early or you know someone else who couldn't make it, they will be recorded and you'll be able to show it to them. I'd like to start just with a quick poll. We are trying to get a better sense of who our audience is, especially because a lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about is a little bit California specific. So if you're comfortable, please just quickly click which county of the ones that are listed here you live in, and that will help us in the future have a better sense of who our audience is and what kind of like county-specific resources we can direct you to. So just to give you an overview of what this presentation is going to, the form that we're going to take, I'm going to talk for a little bit about how induction cooking works. And then from there, I'm going to talk about why Acterra and lots of other organizations promote the adoption of induction cooking. And we're going to have a presentation from Dr. Michael J. Martin from Physicians for Social Responsibility, who's going to talk about the health impacts of gas stoves and the benefits of induction there. And then we'll have some time for questions on the technology. Throughout this whole presentation, you're welcome to just put questions into the chat as you think of them. And I'll try to keep an eye on it. And if a question can be answered, right in the moment, I will. And otherwise, we'll kind of revisit them at the end. There'll be a little time after each section when you can kind of ask questions at that time as well. So then from there, we're going to talk about the various ways that it's possible to get induction cooking into your home, whether that's by installing a big range or buying a little portable cooktop. We're going to talk about some other induction programming that Acterra has and a lending program that you can participate in, and have some time on questions on installations. And then we'll have a presentation from Vanessa Shin of Peninsula Clean Energy, who will tell you about the programs that are available to you for home electrification if you live in San Mateo County. So that is what we're going now. I'm going to try to close out this poll. And actually, hopefully that poll is closed, but if it's still up on your window, you can just close that window. Let me know if you're having any trouble with that. And dive right in. So when we talk about induction cooking, this is a type of cooking with electricity. It's a way of having an electric stove. Now, most of the time when someone says electric stove, they refer to this kind of coil electric stove that you might be used to. An electric resistance burner is maybe a more technical way to say it. And these produce heat by passing an electric current through a metal coil. Oh, I'm showing a picture of this now. If you can't see my slides that are up on the screen, let me know. But yes, so these pass electricity through a coil. And whenever electricity flows through metal, it creates heat as a byproduct. But it depends on what kind of metal it is. So the copper wiring in your house or in an extension cord, the electricity travels through that very easily. It does not create very much heat. But other types of metal create lots of heat when electricity passes through it. For example, an incandescent light bulb, an inefficient kind of light bulb, has a little metal filament and electricity passes through it and that heats it way up to the point where it produces light. That's also why those are so inefficient, because they're producing a bunch of heat in addition to that light. So that's the same principle at work here in these electric stoves. And they are heating this heating element, and then the pan with the food in it goes on top of that heating element. And in order for that to work well, the heating element has to have what's called a high thermal mass. It has to be a little bit slow to heat up and slow to cool down, and it has to kind of hold heat very well. And it needs that for temperature stability and for safety. If it had a much lower thermal mass and you turned it on without a pan on there, it could get way too hot very quickly and be at risk of starting fires. And it wouldn't hold temperatures as stably when there was food on top of it. However, that means it's really slow to heat up and slow to cool down. Anyone who's cooked with one of these things knows that, if you're trying to turn something down to a simmer very rapidly or something like that, when it's already very hot, it takes a while to cool down and it can kind of be hard to control the temperature precisely. So induction is a different kind of cooking with electricity that fundamentally uses a similar principle, but with a lot more control. So instead of having a heating element in an induction cooking situation, the pan is being produced, sorry, the heat is being produced in the pan itself. And the way that heat gets produced there is by using the principle of electromagnetic induction. This is a way that current can move from one piece of metal to another piece of metal without them actually being in contact the way something might be plugged into something else. So if you've ever seen one of those like wireless charging machines for a phone where you just put it down on a pad and then the phone charges, or if you've seen the big coils on power transformers, on a big power pole, these are also using the same principle where you can move electricity from one place to another using magnetic fields. So the magnetic fields in an induction burner are causing these very small currents called eddy currents to happen in the actual pan itself. And that means the heat is being produced by that electricity in the pan. Now, this isn't some kind of large current where you could electrocute yourself. It's these kind of microscopic things, microscopic currents, little eddy currents. But it is still electricity and it's still directly producing heat. So that means if you turn off the magnetic field, there's no heat being produced at all. There's just the heat that's latent in the pan, but you don't have that hot heating element underneath the way you do with a traditional electric stove that keeps the pan very hot. So that means you can be incredibly precise about how much power is flowing into the pan, how much heat is flowing into the pan, and incredibly precise about immediately turning on that power and immediately turning it off. Yeah, so that's the overview of how induction works. Now, sometimes this sounds a little bit science fiction-y and a little bit scary to people. Oh, we're using these magnetic fields to like beam power around. What's that going to do to your body? What's that going to do to other things nearby? So induction is very safe. The magnetic field strength from a refrigerator magnet that's just on your refrigerator is about 100 Gauss, and the field strength from the induction cooktops operation is about 0.2 Gauss. Now, that's a little bit misleading because what really matters here is the fact that the magnetic field is shifting back and forth, is oscillating, and your refrigerator magnet isn't doing that unless you're shaking it around in an incredible way. But there's no harmful effects that have ever been found from oscillating magnetic fields at these frequencies and intensities. It produces a kind of low frequency radio wave. It's very safe and very, very low power. Now, it can affect metal and electronics in a different way from a refrigerator magnet. Of course, it is heating up the pan that's on top of it. I wouldn't recommend that you just put your phone right on top of the induction burner and turn it on. But of course, I wouldn't recommend that you do that with a gas stove or an electric resistance stove either. And other than that, it's not going to cause any huge problems. The one exception here is that if you have a pacemaker, we highly recommend that you check with your doctor before you directly use induction cooking. You can be in the same room with it or kind of walk past it. That's totally safe. But if you're going to be standing right over the stove, you want to make sure that your doctor knows about that and that your pacemaker is okay with that. Most of them are, but you should definitely check. Now, in order for this to work, the pan has to have iron content. Induction doesn't work with a pan that doesn't have iron content because these magnetic fields need to affect it in this way. So if a magnet sticks to a pan, that means it's going to work with induction. And if a magnet doesn't stick to a pan, in almost all cases, that means it won't work with induction. So cast iron, carbon steel, enameled iron, those always are going to work on induction. Stainless steel almost always works on induction, but sometimes it doesn't. There are certain mixes that aren't magnetic. And then there are a lot of pans that are kind of a maybe. There are lots of ceramic pots and pans that do in fact have iron in the base, but there are other pots and pans that don't. And the same is true of glass pots. Sometimes it's completely glass, and often there's an iron coaster in the base that will make it work. And then there are many copper and aluminum pans that have kind of a different colored base that has been interwoven with iron. Some of these have even done this, even if they weren't made specifically for induction, because the iron gives it a kind of higher thermal mass, which is sometimes desirable. So for those kinds of pans, you want to check with a magnet, but it kind of depends. Then if you have a transparent glassware pan or a copper only pan or an aluminum only pan, those never work with induction. They're not magnetic. Magnets won't stick to them. So they can't be used on an induction stove. So that's one of the limitations of induction is you need specific cookware. You might already have lots of it. Like for example, I cook on cast iron a lot of the time, regardless of whether I'm cooking on induction. But it's possible for some people that you would need to replace some of your cookware in order to cook on induction. It also has a couple of other cooking limitations. So there is no open flame. The heat is produced directly in the pan. So if you're trying to do a kind of cooking that requires that open flame, for example, maybe you want to char a pepper or you want to heat a tortilla directly over the burner, then that isn't going to work on induction. You need to use a pan or a griddle or some kind of element that's going to carry the heat. It also doesn't have flowing hot air, which for certain kinds of stir frying, the fact that the flame is creating flowing hot air of a gas stove matters. And the pan has to have direct contact with the burner. So if you have a round bottomed wok and you try to put it on a flat induction cooktop, it's not going to work because only that tiny bottom point of contact is going to get heated. So it's not going to work at all. However, you can get a special induction unit for a curved wok that will heat it, that will make contact with it and heat it. So at this point, I want to pass it over to Mike to start talking about why we advocate using induction instead of gas. So thank you so much, Mike, for being here, and take it away.
Great, thank you. I'm so happy to be here and to share this information with the audience. Let me share my screen. I think you should be able to see my blue screen there. Is that correct?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, let me start my presentation. Well, I am Michael Martin. I'm with the UCSF and with the group called Physicians for Social Responsibility, and we're talking about the health issues related to gas stoves. A brief summary is it's not a good idea to burn things in your home. That applies to gas stoves as well as other things. Physicians for Social Responsibility, I mentioned this is the group I'm associated with, founded in 1961, addresses primarily climate change and the risk of nuclear war, two very hot issues these days. And it won the Nobel Prize in 1985 for its work trying to address the risks of nuclear war. Well, what comes to mind when you think of gas stoves? Well, the gas industry has programmed us to think of natural gas and clean energy and cooking with gas. All those things are things we often think of, but what should come to mind when you think of gas stoves? Indoor air pollution, health risks, fossil fuel use, and global warming. Those are all things closely associated with the use of gas in homes and use of gas in general. Indoor air pollution from gas appliances is analogous to passive smoking. That's passive smoking is secondhand, also known as secondhand smoking. At one point, we thought passive smoking was harmless. There was no problem. Many of you might remember, we could smoke on airplanes. We could smoke in restaurants, bars, even workplaces. Hospitals you could smoke in patient rooms. I mean, we just thought it was harmless. And then research came out showing that there really were some very significant documented harms related to passive smoking, now recognized scientifically as a significant risk for many different diseases. But when legislation was put in place, there was a lag time between the findings and when restrictions were put in place. Well, there's a lot of analogy with gas appliances. They were once thought to be harmless. Hey, listen, I probably roll back a year, 2 years, 3 years. I thought I didn't think anything of it because there weren't the studies showing that there were harms. So I never thought anything about cooking with gas appliances in homes. But research findings are documenting harms, significant harms from gas appliances in homes. It's now recognized scientifically as a significant risk factor for many, many different conditions. And here's where we are now, a lag between the scientific findings and the action to reduce the risk or put in legislation that helps reduce the risk related to these gas appliances in homes. I want to cover what is it that causes all the problems related to cooking with gas? Well, it's different pollutants. Nitrogen dioxide is one pollutant. Carbon monoxide is another one. And there's something called fine and ultrafine particulate matter. That's really the kind of thing you see in the smoke that comes from a cigarette when it's burning, that particulate matter that floats around in the air and gets into our lungs, deep into our lungs and into our bodies. I'll cover each of those pollutants a little bit here. Nitrogen dioxide causes asthma, the development of asthma, and makes asthma worse. It increases susceptibility to respiratory infections of all kinds, and it has a negative effect on our general cognitive function. Maybe we'd be just a little slower when we're exposed to nitrogen dioxide, mentally slower. Carbon monoxide has many, many neurologic effects, and they're significant neurologic effects. Fatigue, impaired vision, reduced brain function, dizziness, confusion, nausea, coma, and these are all significant and very noteworthy neurologic effects. Also increases susceptibility to infections, and again, like nitrogen dioxide, reduces overall cognitive function, makes us a little bit fuzzy mentally. This fine and ultrafine particulate matter, these substances coming from the ends of cigarette, those kind of particles cause neurologic effects, including fatigue, memory disturbances, loss of concentration and judgment, aggravates asthma and reduces lung function, and contributes to heart attack and premature deaths. So you can see there's a number of different pollutants, and these are just 3 that come from burning gas in your home. You can see each one of them has significant health effects, which have been documented. Here's a very interesting way of thinking of this. We have nitrogen dioxide standards on a national level for outdoor, not indoor, for outdoor air pollution. And so the government says that the national standard is not to have over a level of 100 parts per billion of nitrogen dioxide. Again, that's outside standard. We don't have an inside standard. But here's what happens when you start burning, when you start cooking with gas in your home. You can see on the left side, the level of nitrogen dioxide is very low. But once you start cooking with your stove, you can see how dramatically that level goes up. And you'll notice that 100 level is the level at which the government has said that outdoor air pollution levels should not be above. So you can see within our very home, we have these nitrogen dioxide levels going up above what's acceptable outdoor. And then it goes down over time, but not down to 0. It stays up. And then once, cooking is done again in the middle of the day, goes back up again above the acceptable level for outdoor standards. And again, down a little bit, up a little bit, down a little bit. And the interesting thing is this happens not just in the kitchen. These levels are throughout the house. And so even in bedrooms, living rooms, the levels go up very dramatically from cooking in the kitchen. Well, who's a vulnerable population? All of us really, but children are especially vulnerable. Why? They have a higher breathing rate and they have greater physical activity. So they're breathing in and out, breathing in these particles in and out more quickly. They have a higher lung surface to body ratio because they're still growing. And they have immature respiratory system with immature immune system to go along with it. So that makes them more susceptible as well. And I should also add, this is a racial justice, this is an environmental justice issue because there are a lot of underprivileged communities and populations that have a higher risk from gas appliances in their oftentimes smaller homes. So it's an environmental justice issue as well. Natural gas impacts not only our health, but our planet's health. Natural gas is primarily methane, and methane is a particle that gets into the atmosphere, and it is 86 times more warming than CO2. We always hear CO2 is the byproduct of burning coal, burning oil, even burning gas. And that's what people talk about oftentimes with global warming. We have to get the CO2 out of the air. But when methane gets into our atmosphere, it's 86 times more powerful than CO2. at warming our atmosphere. So very significant contribution to global warming. Well, how does it get out? It gets out in a variety of ways, not only in our kitchen, but on the way to our kitchen. So the sources include gas wells when they're getting it out of the ground, pipes, gas pipelines that bring the gas together from the wells, compressor stations, transmission pipelines, city decompression gates, distribution pipelines, and then residential gas lines, and finally in our kitchen. But along each of these steps, there is an opportunity for methane to leak and to get into the atmosphere and cause global warming. And many stoves in homes release small amounts of methane on a continuous basis into not only our homes, but the atmosphere. Methane pollution is responsible for 1/2 of the Earth's warming to date. So it's not a minor factor. It's a huge contributor to climate change. So those are some of the environmental effects of cooking with gas. It has both health effects and environmental effects. So what should come to mind when you think of cooking with gas? Indoor air pollution, health risks, fossil fuel use, and global warming. So all in all, we're better without gas appliances in our homes and with using electricity to heat our food and our homes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. Super appreciate that. I think that for me, that especially that secondhand smoke comparison, I don't know, feels like very potent. It's like, yeah, something that seems very normal, and then all of a sudden you realize it's unhealthy. It's really interesting. Yeah, we had a question that will slides be shared after the call today. Yes, we'll send out the recording, and we can also send out the link to the slideshow. Just one note that I want to make about the health harms of cooking with gas is that there are ways to protect yourself before you're able to totally switch to a different way of cooking. So having a window open, making sure that your fan is going, making sure that you have good ventilation, those are all going to make the impacts of cooking with gas less severe, in the event that you can't switch away from gas immediately. Totally, it's not, you're able to protect yourself to some extent by making sure that your homes are ventilated. So there is one other reason to promote induction. It can often seem a lot less serious after talking about these like very significant environmental and health impacts. But there are also a lot of people who just really enjoy cooking with induction as compared to cooking with gas, or especially with electric resistance stoves. Like I was saying earlier, induction can provide a very, very precise amount of power to the pan that's being heated. And it can also provide a very large amount of power. So induction often boils water very, very quickly compared to other ways of cooking. There are some cases in which you can bring a pot of water to a boil in under a minute. And a lot of induction stoves, especially newer and slightly more expensive models, have this ability to distinguish between how much power is going into the food versus what temperature you're trying to hold the food at. And it can be hard. We often intuitively think of like, oh, cranking up the flame on a gas stove or turning it up on an electric stove is more power and making it hotter. But those can often be a little bit different. This is the most obvious when you're boiling water. You can have a rolling boil with a lot of bubbles, with a lot of power flowing through the pan, or you can have a simmer that's still at the same temperature of boiling water, but not a lot of heat is going through, and the stuff is going to cook a little bit slower than at a harder boil. So a lot of induction stoves allow you to distinguish between those things and allow you to precisely hold at a particular temperature, or pour in a bunch of power and then hold at a particular temperature, or turn off in the moment that you particularly want to turn off. And they can be, you can like get a level of precision with how you're planning your cooking and what you're actually doing that's much, much harder to achieve when the only thing that you can do is turn a somewhat imprecise dial. Just speaking from my own experience cooking with induction, I think like it for me was very easy to get the hang of, because when you're operating in this power mode, it's very similar to just turning a dial. But then sometimes when you're looking at a recipe that's calling for something more specific, or if you're cooking something that's a little bit has a risk of burning, but you also want it to be at a high temperature, you're making some kind of sauce, it can be really fun to like cook it a few different times and really nail down exactly your experience of cooking it. And then you have that precision and you can kind of replicate it very easily over and over again from there. So this depends to some extent on what model you buy, but for lots of people, yeah, cooking with induction can be really rewarding and really precise and really allow you to have a great time, with your cooking. And then just to reiterate what Dr. Martin said about the carbon emissions, thinking about the emissions from burning methane and also from leaking methane, induction stoves aren't actually the highest level of emitter in buildings. So buildings overall have a huge amount of carbon emissions. This image is showing kind of the breakdown of the carbon emissions that come from homes and buildings. And on the right is emissions from electricity generation, although that cloud has gotten a lot smaller since 2018 when this image was made. But then there's also these direct emissions in your home from a gas water heater or a gas stove. And we can make the electricity clean. Vanessa's going to talk about that in a while, about the clean energy you can get from providers like Peninsula Clean Energy. But we can't make that gas that's flowing directly into your home clean. And ideally, in the future, you can have cheaper and more simply designed buildings that are all electric, that don't have that gas hookup at all. So it's not just that we want to, ideally not be cooking with the gas and we want to not have that line flowing into your home at all, so that we can fully eliminate that kind of blue cloud over your home that's representing the emissions that are coming from combustion inside the home. Let me just take a minute to look at the chat for questions. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in now. Okay, so we have a question about, do you need to use the loud overhead exhaust fans? So you definitely should use fans when you're cooking with gas to try to reduce the amount of air pollution in your home. With induction, it depends. You don't necessarily need a fan all the time because you're not combusting a fuel. However, if you've ever, heated oil to its smoke point, you can get lots of smoke and things like that just from the cooking process, not from the fuel itself or from what's heating your food. So you may still want to have a fan and may still want to have ventilation, if you're making some really high temperature stir fry or something like that, that's going to create a lot of smoke. But overall, induction cooking is less reliant on those kind of fans. We will email out the link afterwards to everyone who is registered on the Eventbrite, but you can also find it on the Planet Acterra YouTube channel. Another question is, are there induction stoves and controls that are safe for people with poor vision? So this is a great question. A lot of induction stoves have kind of small buttons and a small digital screen that might be harder to use for someone with poor vision, especially if you're trying to distinguish between a lot of these smaller buttons. But there are a lot of them that have dials, that have a main way of controlling turning a dial that's easy to grab and easy to turn, similar to any other stove that you might have used. I'm not sure about any kind of specialty ones that are made specifically for people with poor vision. They might exist, but I'm not confident of that. But I do know that you can find ones that have dial-based controls. And there are ones that have dial-based controls and still can switch between, power and temperature modes and things like that with one large button or something like that. We have another question that is, are cooktops easy to clean, for example, with spills and oil splatters? And the answer is extremely yes. There is no, metal thing or wire mesh or anything. The pan sits directly on top of a ceramic surface. So oil and whatever food stuff spills onto that. But once it's spilled, it doesn't burn because that heating surface is not really hot. And it just kind of sits there. And that means at the end of cooking, you can just wipe it off with a rag. And it's almost always completely clean right after that. If you were cleaning with something super sticky that might have dried on, maybe you'd have to scrub at it a little bit. But most of the time, it's so much more easy to clean than any other kind of stove that it's almost hard to articulate. We will get to specific brands in a moment for the question about what are the best induction cooktop oven and combo appliances. I won't be giving all that many specific brand recommendations though, because it really depends on your exact setup and what you're looking for. Another question is, any harm if hand or fingers are placed on top of induction cooktops? No, you don't. If you turned it on without a pan being there and you put your hand on it, there wouldn't be any harm to you either from the heat or from the magnetic field. Now, of course, you wouldn't want to put your hand on top of a pan that's being heated. That's not a great idea. And sometimes people say that the surface stays cool. This is a little bit misleading because the surface has a hot pan directly on top of it. So for example, if you're boiling water, and then you take off the water, that surface that had the pan on it is going to be a little bit hot because there was just, a pan at boiling water temperature on top of it. However, there is an internal fan in most induction units that's keeping that surface a little bit cooler and especially protecting the electronics that are under it. So it usually cools down very rapidly and doesn't have so much latent heat that if you touched it, you would get a really serious burn. But you still shouldn't do that because it still had something hot sitting on top of it. In the same way that if you moved that boiling pan, over to the counter next to it, and then you moved it again, you probably wouldn't want to touch the counter. Yeah, but in general, it's like much safer to touch than that kind of hot flame or a hot resistive element from an electric stove. So I'm going to keep going and start talking about how to get this into your home, but if other questions come up, feel free to put them into the chat as we go. Okay, so different options for trying to purchase induction. Generally, there are 3 different things that people end up getting. You can get a range top, which is kind of like a flat range. You can get a full range that has an oven as well, where you can get a portable induction cooktop that just sits on your counter and plugs into an outlet. So all of these different kinds of things vary widely in terms of the features available and the price and the size. It's really hard for me to give you a ballpark of like what this kind of thing would cost. As you can see, I have 2 up on the screen, a 2-burner unit that costs almost $2,000 and a 5-burner unit that I think original market price was about $350, but when I was looking earlier at like Home Depot website and a few others, you could get it for under $300. It really depends, but there are a lot of circumstances, especially in newer homes or homes that are being renovated, when you can set these directly into a counter in like a different space than you would normally have your stove. You can kind of play around with cabinets being under it or it being in a different place in relation to the sink or things like that, which is very cool because they don't have a lot of, internal volume that can be set into a counter. However, a lot of these do need a high power hookup, like a 220-volt outlet, and I'll talk about that later. Then there's often, you can get a full range that has an oven in it. They're always going to come with an electric oven. Sometimes people ask, is there such a thing as an induction oven? And the answer is no, because induction is about how heat gets into a pan specifically. But you wouldn't use the word induction to talk about heating air, which is what the oven is doing, right? The oven is making the whole volume hot, whereas induction is making like a specific piece of metal hot. So you can have an induction griddle, and you can even have an induction. There are sometimes induction like portable tea kettles that use induction to heat the tea kettle, but you can't have an induction toaster oven or an induction oven or something like that, or an induction air fryer, because that sort of doesn't make sense with the underlying mechanics. So any kind of induction stove full unit is going to come with a kind of normal resistive electric oven. And sometimes you can get one of these where it sits on top of your existing oven with just the stovetop being switched out, but it depends on the models a lot. And then also there are some units that are dual fuel that have gas hookup as well, and maybe 2 burners on gas and 2 burners on induction. If there's a reason that you feel you need this, they totally do exist. We, of course, wouldn't recommend them because that's keeping the gas line into your house. That's keeping the option to cook with gas and have that air pollution. But of course, there might be circumstances where that's necessary. And then there are a few newer units that have an internal battery. That means that you can still use them for a couple of hours if the power goes out. This is often a concern people have with any kind of electric cooking, that maybe you live in an area where the power goes out frequently, and you like having the gas line that still works when the power is out. but these units with the batteries are able to cook when the power is out for some fair amount of time. Those can be a little bit more expensive, but not way more expensive, just a slight markup. And then another type of cooking that I'm increasingly recommending to people are these countertop models, where you plug directly into an outlet and just sit it on a counter or even on top of the burners on your existing stove. These are very cheap. You can get one for as low as $60 sometimes, and you can also get higher end ones for up to $200 or so that have more features. And these have all the benefits of induction. They're very fast. They have a lot of power. They often have a lot of settings. The one problem with them is usually they don't have a really big burner size, so it's often harder to use a really large pan with them. But they're really easy to use, and there are a lot of people who end up getting one of these, and most of the time you're only cooking on one burner, and so they just cook on this, and then every once in a while you're cooking on two burners at once, and so they use their stove as well. But it's really easy for one of these very cheap units to replace, a huge fraction of the cooking that you normally do, and to give you a lot of experience cooking with induction and getting an idea of what features you prefer and you don't prefer, without having to invest in the whole range or something more expensive like that. Another big advantage of these is that you can get them if you're a renter. So for example, I'm a renter. I have an electric resistant stove. I don't have power over what stove I have, right? Like I have to get the landlord to replace it for me. But this kind of thing where you just put it on top of the counter, you can get one for, under $100 and then use it regardless of what power you have over your stove and your kitchen setup, as long as you have a normal, wall outlet in your kitchen. We had a question that was, are there portable induction cooktops that can be used on a 15 amp system by itself with no other loads on the system? I think, well, so the answer is yes, definitely, because there are induction cooktops that have power settings where you can choose to use them under their maximum power. So for example, a lot of new wave induction cooktops have a power setting where you can change between the maximum power of 600, 900, and 1500 watts. And that's going to similarly end up reducing the maximum current draw. So if you used one of those on a low power setting, it would not go above 15 amps on a system, but it would be much slower to heat things like boiling water. Most of the time, these are going to be drawing at sort of more standard cooking, as Irvin put in the chat, between 1700 and 3000 watts, between 15 and can end up using like some amount of 15 to 20 amps. Actually, I'm not sure about that amperage, but most of the time that 15 amp system is going to be able to support a lower power cooktop. A few things to consider in terms of picking a unit. So all induction units have an internal fan that keeps the electronics from overheating. Some units, especially cheaper portable units, this fan is pretty loud. It's not wild. It's not louder than, for example, a microwave or fan on top of a range, but some people don't like that fan noise just kind of happening whenever they're cooking. Some lower end induction models also have an element that, instead of being finely tuned to the amount of power that's going in, kind of uses a power setting where it'll turn on and then off for some fraction of the time. So if you had it on a low setting, maybe it would click on and off, every 30 seconds or something like that, as opposed to holding a specific power. This is especially true for ones that go into a temperature mode, where you're trying to get it to hold a specific temperature. The heating unit will turn on and off periodically in order to hold the temperature that you're trying to hold at. And that can sometimes come with a little click noise every time it turns on and off. Not all of these have it, but some of them do. And not everyone finds this kind of thing annoying, but some people do. It's something to be aware of. Another thing to think about is the size of the burner coil. Heat is only going to be produced directly above and just a little bit outside that burner coil, which means if you use a really large pan on a small burner, if you can think about a gas stove flame spreading up and around and also ending up heating the sides of it if it's a really large flame. That doesn't happen with induction. The heat is only going to flow within the pan. It's not going to have that kind of external heating on the sides. That's totally fine as long as you're using the right size pan. But if you're using a really large pan on a small burner, that's only really going to heat the center. Now, again, most of the time this is fine because you can wait for the pan to heat up along the sides, and it's pretty normal for cooking on any kind of stove, if you're frying something, for the middle of the pan to be hotter than the outside. But one thing that does end up happening is, because induction creates so much power and creates so much heat, you can have the middle of the pan end up getting worn out because it's getting heated and expanding very slightly, the way everything warps when it gets heated. But the outside isn't getting heated. And because induction is so powerful, the middle is heating a lot faster than the outside. So sometimes if you end up using a large pan on a small burner for a really long time, the pan can get damaged in a way, and warped in a way that's really unusual with any other kind of cooking. This is super easy to avoid as long as you make sure that you're not, cooking really high heat stuff with a large pan over and over again. But it does mean that when you're thinking about the kind of cooking that you want to do, you want to make sure to get a large enough burner for your regular cooking needs, so that you don't end up damaging these pans or having to wait too long for them to heat up. And then finally, it's useful to think about what kind of advanced functions you'd want. A lot of people are fine with just a dial and using the precision of that dial and using it in power mode. And a lot of other people want, some kind of programmable function where you can ask it to go to 300 degrees for 20 minutes and then automatically turn itself down to 270 degrees for 15 minutes and then do something else. A lot of these have something like that. And so that can be really appealing to some people. And often you can get that for not too much extra cost, but it's something to think about. We had a question about what's the typical lifespan of induction cooktops and stoves. And the answer is it varies wildly. There are sort of cheaper end induction cooktops that, if you transport them a lot and use them heavily for 3 to 5 years, they're going to have a chance of burning out. There are a lot of people I know who've been using a portable cooktop for way more than that, for 8 or 9 years, and it's held up perfectly fine. The same is true of these larger installations, and a lot of the people that Acterra works with, are newer home electrification people who have only had their new appliances for something under the last 5 years. So to some extent, we don't really know, because this market is really expanding. However, most of the time, there's not a lot of maintenance that needs to be done on these things. Because it's a clean surface, it's hard for water or oil or other things to get into its inner workings and cause any kind of problem. So unless it gets damaged externally for some reason, they can last for a very, very long time. More than 10 years is very reasonable to expect. And yes, all kinds of induction, we had a question, does the induction stove require direct contact like the cooktops? Yes, all kinds of induction cooking require direct contact, and you want to make sure you have a large enough burner. Some other challenges you might face in trying to install these things: you might need a 220-volt electrical outlet, the kind of outlet that might be used for a laundry machine or something like that, and you might not have one of those in your kitchen. So that might require some kind of rewiring, which might be expensive. And if you're already close to the limit on your electrical panel, then you might need a panel upgrade. There are certain ways to, go over the limit on your electrical panel by some kind of system to make sure you're not using multiple appliances at the same time. You can imagine, okay, just don't run your dryer when you need to cook, and you could have them both on the same circuit. But that can also be expensive to install, and you want to make sure that you're being safe. If you want to integrate it with an existing oven, that can be more expensive. If you're a renter and you're trying to get your landlord to do it, you can run into a million different kinds of problems. So that can be challenging. And then if you have a countertop unit and you're cooking a lot of, high temperature stuff that creates a lot of smoke, you may not be using it under a normal stove vent. So you may want to worry about, can I make sure that my space is ventilated and I'm not going to cough because I, heated all of this oil to the smoke point for too long. So those are all, oh dear, I clicked a very large number of things. Those are all things to consider. So just quickly to point you in the direction of a few resources, BayREN, the Bay Area Regional Energy Network, has a $750 rebate for a induction unit if it replaces gas. So you can't get this for a little portable thing unless you're also getting rid of your gas stove. But if you are, replacing a gas stove with an induction cooktop anywhere in the San Francisco Bay Area, you can get this $750 rebate from Bayren. It's still up on their website. Then if you, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, which serves Santa Clara County, has a great contractor network that you can look at to find a contractor. And many of those contractors serve outside of Santa Clara County. So if you want to talk to a contractor about induction installation and information, that's a great place to look for a resource. And then finally, if you happen to work in or know someone who works in a commercial kitchen, like a restaurant kitchen, East Bay Community Energy in Alameda County has a rebate for commercial kitchens in Alameda County if they want to fully electrify. So that can be quite a lot of money, and it is an application process on their website. Then there's also the Inflation Reduction Act, the federal bill that was passed. This is all incentives and tax breaks that are going to be implemented by the state. I don't think any of them are quite accessible yet, but you can expect there to be a rebate of up to $840 from the federal government for electric cooking appliances. However, it's only accessible to people under a certain income thresholds. And then in addition, there's up to $500 to cover some kinds of conversion costs and up to $4,000 for electrical panel upgrades related to home electrification. I don't have the details yet as to how to access this, but this is something to be thinking about if you're planning a remodel. Just keep an eye out for that kind of thing. If you want to get some ideas about how to pursue electrification in your own home, Acterra has a new platform partnering with Yellowtin, where you can plug in information and their platform will automatically give you some suggestions about what to electrify and estimates for your carbon reductions. Now, these are just very baseline estimates. It'll often tell you something a little bit nonsensical. Like, for example, I don't have a car and it keeps telling me to get an electric vehicle to reduce my emissions, which will not reduce my emissions because I don't have a car. But it's a really good way to learn about kind of new types of electrification and new things that you could be doing. And it provides also links to explanations and resources. So a lot of the rebates that I just told you about, if you looked on this platform for induction information, it would direct you to them as well. So we welcome you to sign up at this link and experience the platform. This is new for us to participate in. And so we'd love to hear feedback on what your experience using it is, if it's helpful for you or if it ends up not being. But it's just a resource that we have available to you if it ends up sounding interesting. A couple more induction resources. If you're in Alameda County, you can apply to borrow one from Acterra and East Bay Community Energy. This is a great way to get some experience cooking on one without having to buy it. And in addition, if you're in Alameda County, you can contribute to this East Bay Community Energy sponsored induction cooking contest. They have a bunch of fun prizes for you, including the ability to win a portable cooktop and maybe a few more prizes coming soon. And those are for people who are in Alameda County again. So I want to pass it off now to Vanessa Shin from Peninsula Clean Energy, who's going to talk about resources that are available to you if you live in San Mateo County. Thank you so much for being here, Vanessa.
Great. Thank you so much, Leo. And thank you to Acterra for inviting us and for all of you for being here. Since this is I believe the first Green at Home workshop of the year, I go into some detail about what Peninsula Clean Energy is and how residents of San Mateo County and the city of Los Banos can benefit. And so we were formed in 2016 with a mission to create a sustainable world with clean energy for everyone. And we are an automatic benefit of living in San Mateo County for the city of Los Banos, and we provide clean energy at lower rates, which is great for protecting the environment, but also makes the case for switching to electric appliances like induction all the more compelling. Next slide, please. So I'll say a little bit more about how it works. We work behind the scenes on what's called energy generation. And what that means is that we purchase electricity on behalf of our customers from clean sources like wind farms or solar arrays, geothermal, hydropower, and we again provide a 5% savings to our customers as well. And then PG&E continues to own the poles and wires that deliver that energy to you. And so that's why even as a Peninsula Clean Energy customer, you'll still receive your energy bill from PG&E. And then you, our residents of San Mateo County or the city of Los Banos, can benefit from clean energy at lower rates. You're helping the environment. And again, it's an automatic benefit, so you didn't need to sign up for it. Next slide, please. And so to say a little bit more about our community benefits, I mentioned that we have lower rates for electricity compared to PG&E. And so for the average residential customer, that comes out to a few dollars of savings every month, which is, just a little something. But when you look across all of our customers since 2016, we've estimated that they've saved $107 million. So $107 million that are staying in the community. And again, we're a not-for-profit organization, so any net revenues that we make are reinvested back into programs and lower rates. And then I also mentioned how our mission was to help fight climate change. And so with our customer support, we have reduced the greenhouse gas emissions from electricity by 98% since we started in 2016. And so that means that there are very little emissions associated with the electricity that you use. And so that just makes it all the more compelling to switch to using this very clean source of electricity in our everyday lives whenever we can. Next slide, please. And so we have a few induction resources that Leo gave a lot of good ones earlier. And so on our website, we have a video of a chef demonstrating how to create a chocolate banana crepe. And so definitely if you are checking out a portable induction cooktop and want some inspiration, we encourage you to check that video out on our website. Next slide, please. And then we also have additional rebates if you're looking at replacing other appliances in your home. And so we have thousands of dollars in rebates for water heaters and heating and cooling systems, electric vehicles. And so I encourage you to check out our website for more information about that. Next slide. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much, Acterra, for partnering with us and for all of you for attending.
Great, thank you so much, Vanessa. And I should have mentioned this earlier, but Peninsula Clean Energy is the presenting sponsor of these workshops. We're able to do it because of their support. So really appreciate you being here and sharing all these resources with people in San Mateo County and Los Banos. So we have a few more minutes for any last questions. Just want to say before any last questions, thank you all for being here and for coming and to this event. And a huge thank you again to Dr. Mike Martin and to Vanessa Shin for presenting. We really appreciate it. Yeah, and for anyone who has follow-up questions afterwards, you're welcome to contact me at leo.steinmetz@acterra.org. You will get an email at some time next week with the recording of this, presentation and with the slides. And you can also respond to that email with questions. Yeah, I see you on mute, Mike. Go for it.
I will make one comment, and that is someone asked about, or you made a comment about needing 220 voltage for your stove. They are now starting to make induction cooktops with batteries in them so that you can use them with 110 and don't need to rewire your panel or get a panel upgrade. Those are just coming out now. There'll probably be more models, better models in the near future, but that's a huge game changer because so many people don't want to rewire their home or put in a new panel if they need to. Not everybody needs to do that, but for those people who would be limited because of that and don't want to spend the money, that option is coming out and it's a very valuable one. They're doing the same thing with electric water heaters too. They're starting to make them operating on 110 versus 220.
Thanks. That's a great reminder. Yeah. I mentioned those battery ones earlier, and I forgot about the fact that they're making them work on a lower voltage. That's actually kind of another reminder overall that this is an actively developing market. There are more and more people who are interested in induction. And so it's very possible that things are going to get cheaper and have more features in the future. So maybe another reason to try out one of those portable cooktops before worrying about a total kitchen remodel. And then if you decide you like it and you end up figuring out which pans to use and things like that, it might be easier and cheaper to get the larger range in the future if you have the ability to do so. But of course, if you're doing some kind of remodel now, there are a lot of great products that are still available now and aren't much too expensive. Okay, I see a question in chat about, do induction stoves have a broil function like a gas or traditional electric stove? Yes, the electric oven that's going to be in a induction range is going to have a broil function the way any other electric oven would. Yeah, it's sort of usually an electric oven that's unrelated to the like stove feature above it. And then there was one earlier as well. Oh, asking again about which pans are good to use on induction. So any pan to use on induction has to have iron content, and it has to have a magnet be able to stick to it so that the magnetic fields can produce the electricity and the heat in that pan. Any last questions to put in chat right at the end here? If not, thank you all again for coming. Thank you so much again, Vanessa and Mike, and thank you, Peninsula Clean Energy, for sponsoring these workshops. We will have more of these coming up on other home electrification topics, including heat pump central heating, heat pump water heaters, and home solar. We have lots of other great events as well on EVs and plant-based eating and lots of other sustainability topics. So definitely go to acterra.org, check out our website and our other events that are coming up, and hopefully we can see you at other events soon.